In this video, I'm going to show you how to use your Realeather leather sculpting rose kit to turn these pieces of natural vegetable tanned leather into a realistic, durable, and beautiful leather rose like this. Now that all of my leather pieces are cased and they have sat long enough to firm up and hold a shape, it's time to form my rose. I am going to start with the petal pieces. So I've just set my leaf piece off to the side. I'm going to go from basically the bottom of the rose, the piece that's the furthest down in how they're stacked, to the top piece. So I'm going to start with one of the two larger pieces. And to form the petals, what you want to do is hold this piece and at all times make sure that the smoother side of the leather, the front side, is facing up and the fuzzy side is facing to the back. So I'm going to push and kind of curl the sides of this petal until they just about touch. It doesn't have to be too far in, but I'm going to just hold them there with my thumb, and then with my other hand I'm going to start gently kind of rolling back the edge of the petal. Just like that. I'm going to do that with each of these petals. As you do this, you'll find that because you're shaping the leather with your hands, where the edge of the petal is rolled back, sometimes you'll get sort of little bumps, or it's not going to be entirely even. Don't worry about that. Not only is it not a problem, it's actually that extra texture is actually going to make your rose look a bit more sort of natural and real. And if it does bother you, of course, once you're done shaping all the petals, you can go back and kind of perfect it if that's what you prefer. So that's what the piece will look like approximately once you're done shaping the petals. At this point, if you feel like you want to kind of tuck in those edges, curl them a little bit more, if there's any of those bumps that you don't like, or if you'd like to do the type of rose that has more of a sort of point at the edge of the petals, you can just gently pinch them like that. So it's a good time to look over them and see if there's anything else you want to change. And then I need to put this first layer of the rose into, this is just a paper towel, cut from paper towel roll. It's about 1.5 inches across, which is what I need. I could be using anything, a small cup, pretty much anything that's about this across and is at least deep enough that I can kind of push this down in here just a bit. So I'm going to center my piece and just gently push it down in until the edges of the petals are sort of just touching. So it's just down about that much. I'm going to set this off to the side. I'm not going to forget about it. Now, the next two layers, the other larger layer and one of the smaller layers, are actually done basically the exact same way. So I have these that I've already completed, and I formed them the exact same way I did the first one. And actually curl this one back up a little bit because the only difference in how these are shaped is really how they sort of stack in with this first one. Now at this point, if the edges of your petals on your bottom layer are sticking up too much right kind of where they attach, you can sort of push them back just a little bit because it'll help the piece on top to fit. Now I want to layer this second of the larger pieces in, and I want to make sure the petals are sort of sticking out between the petals of the piece underneath. And then I can gently kind of tuck that in there. And because this is being squeezed a little bit tighter, these petals really will need to overlap with each other. So some of them will naturally do that, and some of them might kind of get stuck like that one right there. So you can just tuck them in and make sure they're sort of overlapping together. Whether you want to have it just overlapping one direction all the way around or change it up a little bit, this just goes with what you prefer. So, oops, keeps moving. So it should look about like that as it sits in there. And then the first of the smaller two petal pieces is just the same. Just form it exactly the same way. as the other pieces, and then it's going to get tucked in there. But because it needs to have the petals tuck in against and overlap with each other even more so than the piece underneath, I'm going to do that sort of ahead. So I have two that are going over the one next to them, so I think this one I'll have it go under just so it maybe looks slightly more random. And just gently hold them together until they kind of tuck in like that. Then I can just snug this in there with the petals again sticking out sort of where the petals of the layer below meet. So they're all kind of tucked in. Oops, until I knock one out. Then the last piece, the last of the smaller petals, is what's going to be the sort of swirly, tighter center of the rose. So I'm going to start with just pick a petal, they're all the same, and start rolling it. It doesn't matter which side you start on, but I'm just picking a side, and it's going to get rolled into sort of a little bit of a cone shape like this. So it's kind of like what we were doing before where I was tucking the edges in, but I want to roll it a lot tighter because this is going to be that little curly part right in the middle. And then while holding this together with one thumb, I'm going to start curling back this edge. I'm going to try to go down a little bit down here where it overlaps, as far as I can. You can't go down too far, it's kind of hard to hold, but just to have that go down a little bit and just sort of uncurl that edge back as you go around. We want this to stay as curled as possible, but you can also recurl it if it starts to loosen up. So I'm just kind of squeezing it in place, and I'm going to move to the next petal. And this one doesn't need to be, and don't worry about that, it will loosen up, but you can always tuck it back in. These ones don't need to be quite as curly, but I am going to make these edges overlap a little bit more than I did with the larger petals, so they're just kind of just touching. And then curl back these edges. And the same with this one. And just keep them curled pretty tight. And then the same with this last one. Alright, then I'm coming back to my first petal, my very curled up one. I'm kind of recurling it a little bit because it's gotten a little bit undone. And just seeing how that swirl looks. And then while holding it sort of shut like this with my thumb, I'm going to start kind of tucking the other petals around it. This first one, I'm going to make it sit so that this petal is kind of where these two parts meet, just the same way we've been doing this whole time. And then I've got to kind of hold that in place with my fingers. And then the next one, kind of tuck that in right there. And then this last one right here. And you'll kind of feel the leather sort of stretch and bend as you're molding it in place. And the bottom probably is popping out a little bit like this. This is a good time to just gently push that down. It just lets it be a little flatter. It'll make it easier when we're attaching the pieces together. This is also a great way to make just a rose bud or a much smaller flower. You don't always have to use all layers. There's ways you can separate them out. Alright, I'm going to tuck that one in. Make sure it all lines up. And then this is the point where you can look, you can look at your rose and kind of look at how it's sitting, look at how the petals are. If you want to change the shape of them or make it a looser rose or make it, a smaller, tighter rose, you just kind of do that. And once you're happy with how it looks, just leave it to dry. Leave it in the cup, layered up like this, so it'll hold it all in shape, and leave it to dry completely. In a perfect world, that would be at least overnight. But even if you have to rush it with a hairdryer, just make sure it's completely dry before you move on to coloring or gluing, because it will hold its shape much better if so. Once the petal pieces of your rose are formed and stacked up and drying, it's time to move on to this piece, which has a rose leaf and then the sepals, which are these little leaf parts that sit behind the flower. So this part is what I'm going to be using this stylus tool for. I'll be using the pointed end to mark the texture lines into the leather. So first you want to make sure that Your piece is facing smooth side up, the right side of the leather up, which is the side that I'll be making the marks into. And this piece of leather has been cased, as we talked about before. It is evenly damped through still, but it has firmed up and dried enough that it's not feeling wet. And when I start doing the lines on it, I should be able to get nice clear lines that stay. If the leather is too wet, sometimes you might get a little sheen of moisture as the lines are sort of pressed into the leather, which definitely means your leather needs to sit longer. Or you might find that the tool presses in very easily, the leather is soft, but it sort of puffs up a little and you're not getting clear lines. That also means it's probably a bit too wet. So I'm going to start with the texture lines on the leaf, which you can find in the pattern. And I'm going to start with the center vein of the leaf. And I'm just eyeballing these. You can also trace them off of the pattern. It's totally fine to gently scratch them into the leather before you go, more with more pressure to make sure that everything's where you want it. You will want to use a decent amount of pressure to get nice clear lines in there. Don't press so hard that you're snagging on the leather or that you're worried that you might break the stylus, but definitely give enough pressure that you're going to be able to see the lines and they go in nice and clear. So I've done the sides of my vein. Now I'm going to do these smaller vein lines that go along the side of the leaf, radiating out from the center. With these, you don't need them to be exactly perfectly spaced, but it does help the look of it if they can at least be fairly consistent, not, have two very far apart and two very close together. Just if they're generally consistent, it'll look good. Then with the sepals, it's basically lines that kind of radiate out from the center and sort of follow the curve of them. It's really just creating a texture that will give it a little more detail and also differentiate these pieces from the look of the very smooth flower petals. And I'm just putting them on there kind of quickly. So you can see how those lines are pretty clear in there. I can really see them when the light catches them. Now, if you want to add a little extra detail to your rose leaf, you can use scissors or a blade to cut in the serrations along the edge of the leaf. It'll make it a more accurate rose leaf, and also to cut in to sort of separate the sepals into smaller points like this. If you want to do that, it does add some extra detail, but if you don't, it still looks really good if you kind of leave it smooth like this. But I'm going to show you the forming with this one that's already been cut like that. So now that all those lines are in there and I've cut that little bit of extra detail, what I want to do is form this so that it'll have more dimension. So I'm going to start with this, again, the smooth side still facing up. You can see the lines. I'm going to start by taking the leaf and pinching along that vein line and just kind of gently pinching it so it's sort of like closing a book. And it should stay. And again, if it's just flopping out of shape, then it may be too wet. So just keep an eye on that. And then at the same time, I'm just going to go around and kind of do the same thing roughly with the sepals. I'm just kind of pinching along the center of them. Alright, and then coming back to the leaf, with my pointer fingers, I'm sort of gently holding this fold in place, and then with my thumbs, I'm going to start just a nice gentle curve of the edge of the leaf, just kind of rolling under a little bit and curving. And just kind of going from the base of the leaf to the end of it. And then once you've gotten that curve started, you can see how it's curving along that edge. You can also, go back and kind of fiddle with it and, get it curved a little bit more, make sure, you didn't miss any spots. There we go. And right now I'm kind of over forming this leaf. It's very sort of curved in right there when the actual leaf would be a little bit flatter, but that's because in a moment I'm going to be doing a step that will flatten it out a bit, so it's always good to have more dimension than you need. So with these sepals, I can do just a little bit of the same thing, kind of curving down the edges just a tiny bit. There we go. And then I want to roll these back and under. And sometimes those little ones on the sides will kind of try to get away from you. You may find it actually easier to do it upside down, kind of roll it with your thumb. Just curl them underneath. You can always uncurl them a little bit later if they're too much. Alright, and then with the leaf, I've got my finger under this, about the center of it, and then I'm just very gently going to curve it back like this. And this is about how much I just curved it. So you can see it's not dramatic, but it definitely will flatten out and open up your leaf a little bit, and it will make it look much more natural. Once you have your piece looking like this, you're going to need another little tube. This is a cut down one from a paper towel roll. This one needs to be about an inch across. And I'm just going to center the sepals in it, press it down gently with my finger so that it's got a nice kind of curved bottom. That's what the rose will be sort of sitting in once everything is dry and the layers are put together. And then just make sure my leaf is sort of sitting there curved back nicely. And once it looks like this, you can let that dry, and when everything is dry, you'll be moving on to assembly.